so I don't. They're very strict on time, right? So, right, so let's go. This is the top list of securing developer workstations. I just want to quickly thank all the pre-bans and welcome you to the main act for Jfokus. So, right, who am I? So, oops, did my computer just, let's go. Did it just freeze? So who am I? I've been at Truesec for about 2.5 years. I usually introduce myself as a mediocre Java developer, and that's because if I actually deliver something, people get surprised. So I've worked a lot with data recovery during my time, like people deleting files and stuff, and I try to recover stuff. I also do code reviews. I've done about 30 assessments of different companies over the past 2 years. So I've seen a ton of different development environments, everything from server setups to personal computers to how developers in general use their computers and their development processes. I also do threat modeling for companies, as in trying to find out how to manipulate them, which is quite fun. And then I also do, nowadays, for the past 6 months, I've mostly been doing development on high threat, like systems with high value. So, and I'm not allowed to talk about that, so you can't ask about that. And then I code Rust and I fly stuff, and yeah. So that's sort of. So what company am I coming from? I'm from Truesec. We are a security company. We have about 200 employees. We operate worldwide. We do everything from monitoring different systems. We do a lot of incident work. So for instance, one of the things we did was that we did the incident work for Coop a year ago, which many of you were probably aware of. And we also do penetration testing. So we try to break stuff, and then development and consulting work, and also talks like these and in different types of ways. So as in a proper conference, you always have to start with a quote. So I'm going to start with one and say I did a code review for a company, and we found a pretty serious implementation problem, and we explained the risks with it. And the response I got back when I gave them feedback was, well, why would anyone want to exploit that? That was the question, right? That was the response back. And the response from me was, well, it's sort of like for profit and world domination. That's what we're dealing against. But all the general tips, and this is now the disclaimer comes. So the disclaimer is this: we always have to establish our threats. So all the things and takeaways I'm going to talk about today is about your organization. So depending on what type of systems you work with, if it's very, very valuable stuff, or if you're just a startup, you have to always evaluate your threats. So what is your worst case scenario, and who are the people you are defending yourself against, right? If you just have a tiny system, you don't have to worry about nation-state attacks from, I don't know, China, right? So you have to adopt, right? And also, the little thing I'm writing down here is, who do you trust, right? So we're going to come back to that all over, like, who do you trust, right? Well, so let's go. The top list. I'm going to straight out and knock the ball out of the park. We're going to talk about this. This is crap. I'm going to straight out tell it, this is crap. Password is a man-made problem, right? It's one of the biggest problems we have, hands down. So credential farming, cracking of credentials, stealing of credentials. People hate passwords. We are humans. We were not made for using passwords. So my first common sense advice is, if you don't have a password manager, get one, right? If you don't have it, get one. I'm going to emphasize that. So weak passwords are still all over the place. Our general recommendation for a standard user password which does not protect secure things is 17 characters. It's because less than that, we start cracking them, right? And 17 characters is a lot, which means you should get a password manager, you should have 17 characters for the master password, but then in your password managers, don't let limit be a factor. Go ahead, have 40 characters. For your Facebook account, please do. I'd be very pleased if I hear that people would have that, right? And Also, if you can avoid passwords, do it, right? Throw them away, right? If you can, use smart cards, YubiKeys, hardware, like anything else but passwords, right? Because passwords are an annoyance. They're really, really hard to protect, and they're really hard to remember, and we are predictable people, and the most common password is still password 123, so, right? Or summer 2022, unless you haven't updated from last year, so. All right. Then another common sense thing, like, do you think about your hardware when you take it from work? Do you think about that? Do you let your kids play with your hardware, right? We still have that. And there's two things here I want to point out, which is a very common thing that people don't really understand, is that if your hardware gets stolen at a gym or in your car, no one will reimburse you. Absolutely no one. Your company insurance will not reimburse you. It's in all the agreements because it's a high value place where things can get stolen. So they won't reimburse you. So make sure that if you have very high, like important stuff and hardware, don't make sure that you actually know where you have it. I leave my computer at work every day. I don't take it home. So just as a notice. And also look out for like what kind of public Wi-Fis you connect to, right? As in here, for instance. The password to this Wi-Fi is very weak. So, sorry for bashing, but that's the truth, right? And then another big like elephant in the room, right? MFA, use it everywhere, right? Everything that is public facing, everything that we can access through the internet, enable MFA. If the service doesn't have MFA, don't use it at all, please. I know I'm very harsh, but that's the reality. And even in your own corporate network, if you have services, internal services, if you have Jenkins, if you have Nexus and all those kinds of things, you should use MFA internally, right? And also, single sign-on is a risk. It's a convenience, but it's also a risk. You have to take that into factors, right? Make it like used to logging out stuff and those. And also, a thing that we see is that people go like, oh, we have MFA, it's fine, we're cool. But all you get is something that sends you something and you just confirm that you are in possession of the hardware. We need a challenge and a response. So they need to send you a code, you have to return it back, or something like that, because that's still a problem. We've seen people trying to spoof this, right? And people, but now we're into nation state territory and I should put on my silver hat and stuff like that. But I'm just pointing that out. The challenge and response is, if it's not that, it's not a good MFA solution, right? Okay, next thing, disk encryption. BitLocker, I hope everyone has it and also has a PIN code for it, right? Mac, File Vault, enable it, right? Linux also, encryption. The last point is something that people usually don't understand, and that is if you put your computer in sleep mode, it won't work. So when you transport yourself from point A to point B, turn off your computer, because if it gets stolen, the stuff on the disk is encrypted. If it gets stolen while it's in sleep mode, it's not encrypted, because the system has access to the file system. It's reading stuff. You open it up and it's unencrypted. So you always need to turn off your computer while you're transporting your things, right? And then you have TPM solutions which have keys in hardware and stuff like that, right? It's the discussion with Windows enforcing TPM solutions on all computers and those kinds of things. But that's a thing that people don't usually understand. So, all right, moving on. We're moving quick, remember. System access, right? You see this? Pokemon cards, we like collecting them. Who in here likes collecting system access? Yes, the more access you have, the cooler you are, right? Isn't it that? The longer you work, the more senior you are. How many times have you asked to be revoked from a system? And I'm not talking about like, oh, I quit from a job and I'm starting the other one, so I have to be revoked. No. How many times have you actually gone in and said, I don't want access to that system anymore because I'm done with that system, right? Me, I love having as little access as possible because then I sleep well at night. And if someone fucks up, it wasn't me, right? That's a good, like, I can sleep well. So think about that, and you should regularly like review your own access. Do you really need access to that system you worked with for 3 years ago, right? Because if you get compromised, they will have more, well, the area of problems can grow, right? Okay, so that was the simple things. Let's go into some of the like slightly harder things to fix in the world, right? We're thinking big. So okay, so third-party dependencies. Ooh, this is a big thing right now, right? Log4j, everyone. Yeah, we don't want to talk about that. Yeah, it's uncomfortable, right? But you have to remember, when you're using third-party dependencies in any form, right, you are inviting others into your system. And that's when we come back to the thing called trust, right? Do you trust the people you are inviting? Because you're basically opening the door and saying, welcome in, have a seat, let me introduce you to my operating system. That's what you do, right? So you have to think about this. And for instance, UA parser, which I'm mentioning down here, that was actually a poison attack where they poisoned a well-known JavaScript, and that was to access personal computers. They tried to do credential stealing and stealing crypto wallets. So that was not against companies. That was against money and fame, sort of, right? So they targeted you. And then this fancy little dotty image that you see here, can anyone guess what that is? That's the dependency map for React scripts. So if you download React script, that's the dependency map, right? I think it's about, at the time being, about 6,000 dependencies. So there's a very cool site that like displays these in graphs and stuff. So dependencies are a huge problem, and you have to think about it. And one of the mitigations is that you have to like agree upon which kind of dependencies you are using. And that in turn comes into the next thing, packet managers, right? So packet managers, Brew and Mac ports are community driven, which also means that what you are getting when you're using Brew or Mac ports might not be what you actually wanted, right? It usually is the developer that submitted their application to Brew or Mac ports, but it doesn't have to, right? And they constantly try to find people that are submitting malicious ones, right? Winget, which is a new one for Windows, when they went stable, version 1.0, they were flooded with 40,000 applications of inserting new programs, which contain misspelled programs, trying to fit in overriding other programs. They try to tinker in things with very questionable sources. So people try this stuff all the time. So this is a dangerous thing, and you need to keep track of what kind of packets you have in your system. Okay? And then, as you can see, some of the things have curated lists. If you do Red Hat, they have curated lists of which packages you can download. If you use Debian, you have a very older version, and you might have to accept of not being on the latest and greatest. But in your personal computer, you need to be aware of what you're pulling home, right? And what you're using, right? Good. Next thing, plugins. This is something not everyone thinks about, right? Anyone here that has played a free mobile game? Free mobile games will always push you to the store and go, buy, 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 buy. What does VS Code do? Oh, I see you're using Markdown. We have a plugin for that. And then they try to push you to the store, right? Please resist. Because the thing is, again, we don't know every time where the plugin comes from, right? So Sneak, which is actually representing here, they did a great blog post where they did some work of looking through some popular plugins, and they found RSCs in all of them. They found the remote code executions in a couple of plugins, which is very, very dangerous, right? So once again, I'm not saying that you should not use plugins, because VS Code is pretty much useless without plugins, but you need to be aware of what plugins you are using, right? And you need to know where they're coming from. And also, in a company, you have to discuss together what plugins you want to use, right? It's very easy to just click on something and then get it home and you don't really want it, right? So, all right. I have then, don't run as admin. Dangerous, very dangerous. I don't have to speak much about this because this is very common sense, right? Oh wait, there it is. Sorry, I was one, right? And then I'm not going to talk that much about this one because it's very common. And then I have the last in the top list, which is isolate processes. If you want to, try to isolate processes. Run VMs of stuff, run VS Code containers, Firefox things. Firefox has something called Firefox containers, GitHub spaces, etc., etc. Right? My last slides I'm going to go through very quick because I'm out of time, but we have a threat intelligence report on our webpage. Read it. It's like reading a lot of cases of where things have gone wrong. It's like reading police reports. It's on our webpage, truesec.com. And then my last thing is security is not only the code you write. You have to review your own security regularly and also help others and create a company culture together. So don't victim blame. Don't do it. Because we all do faulty things all the time and we need to help each other out. So, and that's my talk. Thank you.